Episode 10, The World's Mirror. How we learn to see ourselves through Western eyes. Close your eyes. Imagine courage. The person who saves the city, wins the war, walks away from the explosion in slow motion. Now open them. If you grew up in Nairobi, Kuala Lumpur, São Paulo, or Mumbai, ask yourself, why does that face so often look like someone else's? Why is the jawline sharper than yours? Why is the accent not from your street? And if you grew up in Singapore, one of the wealthiest cities on earth, ask yourself the same question. Because wealth does not break the mirror, sometimes it polishes it. This is not a conspiracy, it is conditioning. And it is perhaps the most successful colonial project of all because it colonized not the land, but the imagination. The invisible curriculum. Empires do not only conquer territory, they conquer the grammar of reality itself. The Roman Empire built roads, but it also built the idea that Latin was the language of law and God. The British Empire built ports, but it also built the idea that English was the language of commerce and civilization. The American Empire built satellites, but it also built the idea that its stories were not stories at all, they were simply the way things are. This is how durable empires operate. Force is expensive, but if you can make your culture the default, your history the standard, your beauty the ideal, then you rule without needing to govern. People do not wake up and decide that Oxford English sounds more authoritative than Jamaican patois. They do not wake up and decide that European art belongs in museums while African art belongs in ethnography collections. They inherit these assumptions the way they inherit the color of the sky. They do not realize they are assumptions at all. That is the invisible curriculum, and it has been in session for centuries. The Dream Factory. Hollywood is not a conspiracy of evil actors. It is something more powerful, a monopoly on the global imagination. By 1950, Hollywood films reached 2/3 of the world's cinema screens. By the end of the century, American television dominated living rooms from Lagos to Lahore. The hero was American. The villain was foreign, or communist, or eventually terrorist. The love interest was blonde. The sidekick was comic relief from somewhere else. These were not accidents of casting, they were structural defaults. When one studio system controls global distribution, its archetypes become human archetypes. That nation's anxieties become global anxieties, its triumphs become universal triumphs, its ordinary citizens become the stand-in for all humanity. Consider the arc. In 1960, the world of Suzy Wong presented Asia as a playground for Western men, sensual, helpless, waiting to be rescued. 60 years later, Crazy Rich Asians was celebrated as a breakthrough. But the wealth, the glamour, the romance, the pacing, the musical cues, all of it was filtered through conventions Hollywood had already established as what a successful global film looks like. The faces were Asian, the grammar was American. And when Michelle Yeoh won the Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once, the moment was genuine and historic. But notice what it required. A Malaysian actress playing a Singaporean matriarch in a film produced by a Hollywood studio, distributed by a Hollywood platform, judged by a Hollywood Academy, to win a Hollywood trophy. The prize was hers. The grammar was still American. Hollywood does not need to ban other stories. It only needs to set the terms by which other stories enter the global conversation. And those terms were written in Los Angeles. Script approval. The relationship between Hollywood and the American national security state is not a secret. It is a contract. The Pentagon's Entertainment Media Office has cooperated with hundreds of productions. Top Gun, Black Hawk Down, Zero Dark 30, Captain Marvel. The deal is straightforward. The military provides aircraft, ships, bases, and personnel. In exchange, it gets script approval. If the screenplay portrays the military in a way the Pentagon dislikes, the jets stay on the ground. Consider Black Hawk Down. The Pentagon cooperated extensively, providing equipment and script consultation. The film depicts American soldiers trapped in Mogadishu, fighting their way out against overwhelming odds. What it does not depict, what it largely erases, is that the rescue convoy that finally extracted them was a combined United Nations force, Malaysian armored vehicles and Pakistani tanks, with Malaysian troops taking casualties under fire to save American lives. Lance Corporal Mat Aznan Awang of the Malaysian army was killed when his APC was hit by an RPG. Several more Malaysian vehicles were destroyed or damaged. Pakistani tanks fired point-blank to clear roadblocks. The senior US commander in Somalia publicly praised the Malaysian and Pakistani soldiers for making the rescue possible. The film, approved with Pentagon assistance, made them invisible. The CIA maintains entertainment liaison offices. It advises on films depicting intelligence work. It shapes how torture is remembered, how surveillance is normalized, how rogue agents are romanticized or condemned. This is documented. You do not need to believe in shadowy backroom deals. The deals are in the open. The state does not need to censor what it can co-author. When the aircraft carrier is a prop, the screenplay becomes a policy document. And because Hollywood is the world's cinema, these co-authored stories do not stay American. They become the stories that children in Jakarta and Nairobi grow up believing are just movies. But movies are never just movies. They are the operating system of the global subconscious, the dictionary of power. Language is not neutral. It is a weapon dressed as a dictionary. When Western militaries cross borders, the news calls it intervention. When rivals do the same, it is aggression. One country's alliance is security. Another's identical alliance is expansion. Sanctions from Washington are rules-based. Sanctions from Beijing are economic coercion. These are not synonyms, they are verdicts. They decide who is the sheriff and who is the outlaw before the story even begins. George Orwell warned that political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable. He was describing this exact machinery. The vocabulary of global news is overwhelmingly generated in London, New York, and Washington. When the entire world learns current events through that vocabulary, the world learns to see through that lens. The frame becomes the fact. The Orientalist lens. In 1978, Edward Said published Orientalism. His argument was not that the West hates the East. It was subtler and more damning. The West constructed an imaginary East to serve its own needs. The Orient was mysterious when the West needed romance. It was backward when the West needed justification. It was threatening when the West needed an enemy. It was helpless when the West needed a mission. This was projection, and it persists with mechanical precision. The Arab world is still framed through oil and terrorism, rarely through literature or engineering. Africa is still framed through famine and wildlife, rarely through innovation or urban dynamism. Asia is still framed through manufacturing and inscrutability, rarely through philosophy or political complexity. These are not places with histories as rich and contested as Europe's. They are backdrops. They exist to reflect Western needs back to Western audiences. And because these images travel through the most powerful media machinery ever built, they do not remain Western assumptions. They become global assumptions. A child in Nairobi learns to see the Arab world through CNN. A student in Jakarta learns to see Africa through National Geographic. A professional in Mumbai learns to see China through The Economist. The Orientalist lens becomes everyone's lens. The colonial inheritance, the empire left, but it left its furniture. English is considered prestigious because colonial administrators spoke it. European accents signal sophistication because colonial officers had them. Lighter skin tones are marketed because colonial hierarchies rewarded them. Borders that cut through ethnic nations remain because colonial cartographers drew them in straight lines. Post-colonial elites send their children to schools modeled on Eton and Harvard because those institutions still certify who matters in the world. Independence is a flag and an anthem. Decolonization is a longer journey. In Singapore, colonial rule ended in 1963, but the English-educated elite still measure success by Western standards, speak the colonizers' language at home, and unconsciously perpetuate the hierarchies their grandparents fought to dismantle. Chinese dialects, Hokkien, Teochew, Cantonese, were deleted from broadcasting. English became the language of prestige. The official Mandarin pushed by the state failed to take root because the population's heritage was Southern Chinese, not the Northern Mandarin the government imported. The empire left, but the language of empire remained the language of power. And a few years ago, the authorities in Singapore erected a second statue of Stamford Raffles. The man was an opium trader. He ran a colonial port. And one of the wealthiest, most successful post-colonial nations on earth chose to honor him again in bronze. This is not a heritage site preserved by accident. This is a deliberate act of colonial veneration. Why do international university rankings overwhelmingly reflect Western institutions? Why are European museums treated as custodians of world heritage while many of their artifacts were extracted at gunpoint? Why do so many newly independent countries retain colonial legal systems, colonial educational structures, colonial administrative habits? These are not accusations, they are historical questions, and the answer is not that the West is uniquely evil. The answer is that when one civilization dominates global institutions for centuries, its assumptions become the water everyone swims in. Fish do not see water, humans do not see their own conditioning. The unearned assumption: white privilege is not an American campus debate. It is a global travel guide. In Hong Kong today, government schools recruit native English speakers under the .NET scheme, and while base pay sits on the same official scale, overseas hires receive housing allowances, passage subsidies, and retention incentives that local Chinese teachers, including those raised in English-speaking countries, are not offered. The job posting says, native speaker. The benefit sheet knows what it means. A white backpacker in Goa receives instant assumptions of competence and wealth that an Indian professional spends a lifetime trying to prove. A white tourist in Nairobi is greeted with deference that a Kenyan entrepreneur must negotiate for. A white English teacher in Hanoi is hired on site while a Vietnamese PhD competes for the same job. This is not about individual malice. It is about a hierarchy of visibility installed over centuries in which whiteness became the default setting for expert, tourist, boss, savior, and civilized. The remarkable thing is how far this privilege travels. It operates not only in former European colonies, but in countries that were never formally colonized by the West: Thailand, China, Japan. The American soldier, the British banker, the European NGO worker, the Australian backpacker, they carry a social capital that was minted in centuries of colonial hierarchy and is still accepted as legal tender across much of the world. This is not a theory. It is an observable phenomenon, and it persists because the mirror still shows the same face. The mirror cracks. Something is shifting. In 2021, Squid Game became Netflix's most-watched series globally. Indian cinema now produces more films than Hollywood by volume. Bollywood is the world's second-largest film industry. Chinese blockbusters now gross billions without needing American distribution. Middle Eastern creators, Latin American studios, African streaming platforms, and independent voices on YouTube and TikTok are building audiences that Hollywood cannot reach and does not understand. AI is democratizing production. A teenager in Lagos can now generate visuals that once required a Hollywood studio. A creator in Lahore can edit footage on software that costs nothing. The monopoly on the means of storytelling is ending. But here is the harder truth. Production is not enough. Distribution is not enough. The deeper question, the question this entire episode has been circling, is whether the audience in Nairobi and Jakarta and Sao Paulo and Mumbai can yet imagine a hero who does not look like the ones they have been shown. Because the world's mirror is not only made in Hollywood, it is also held up by the viewer. And if the viewer has learned to see themselves as a sidekick, as an extra, no amount of new production will change the reflection. The world cannot be properly multipolar if its people still see the world through a single borrowed lens. Who writes the script? Every empire tells stories about itself. The Roman Empire told stories about Roman virtue and the barbarian hordes. Imperial China told stories about the Middle Kingdom and the tributary peoples. Victorian Britain told stories about the white man's burden. The Soviet Union told stories about the radiant future. The United States told stories about the American dream. This is not a crime. It is what empires do. The difference in the 20th century was that one empire's stories reached every screen on Earth. They were not presented as stories. They were presented as reality. They were presented as cinema. They were presented as news. They were presented as prestige. They were presented as the way the world works. A genuinely multipolar world is not merely one with multiple centers of economic power. It is one with multiple centers of imagination. It is one where a child in Lagos can close her eyes and see a hero who looks like her mother. It is one where a filmmaker in Jakarta does not need to ask permission from a distributor in Los Angeles to tell a story. It is one where the vocabulary of global news is no longer generated exclusively in London, New York, and Washington. Reclaiming your cultural space is not an act of nostalgia. It is an act of sovereignty. The question is no longer who gets to be the hero. The question is, who finally gets to write the script?